Catherine the Great remains one of the most influential and enigmatic figures in Russian history. As Empress of Russia from 1762 to 1796, she not only expanded the empire's borders, but also sought to modernize its institutions through ambitious reforms. Her reign marked a period of profound transformation, blending the ideals of the Enlightenment with the realities of autocratic rule. Even centuries after her death, her policies and vision continue to shape discussions about governance, power, and leadership. Catherine's impact on Russia was so vast that her name is often mentioned alongside Peter the Great, another reformist monarch who reshaped the nation. Unlike many rulers of her time, Catherine was not born into the Russian aristocracy, yet she managed to secure the throne and maintain her rule for over 3 decades. Understanding Catherine the Great's legacy requires an examination of the political, social, and cultural landscape of 18th century Russia. The country she inherited was still struggling to modernize after the reforms of Peter the Great, and Catherine took on the challenge of continuing this transformation. She sought to strengthen the central government, expand Russia's influence on the world stage, and implement policies that aligned with the progressive ideas of the Enlightenment. However, her reign was not without contradictions. While she advocated for education, art, and governance reforms, she also upheld and even reinforced serfdom, maintaining the rigid social hierarchy that defined Russian society. Catherine's rise to power itself is a testament to her intelligence, political acumen, and strategic thinking. Born as Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, a minor German princess, she was brought to Russia as the chosen bride for the future Emperor Peter III. However, her marriage was fraught with personal and political challenges, and she quickly realized that her husband was both unpopular and unfit to rule. In 1762, she orchestrated a coup d'état that removed Peter from the throne, allowing her to take power as Empress of Russia. Unlike many rulers who gained power through force, Catherine secured the loyalty of the military and the nobility by presenting herself as a legitimate and capable sovereign who would uphold Russia's interests. One of the defining aspects of Catherine's reign was her engagement with Enlightenment ideals. She corresponded with some of the most prominent philosophers of the time, including Voltaire and Diderot, and sought to bring their ideas into Russian governance. She attempted to reform the legal system, promote education, and support the arts. However, while she admired progressive political theories, she was also aware that Russia was not ready for radical democratic changes. Instead, she balanced Enlightenment thought with pragmatic autocracy, ensuring that her power remained unchallenged while introducing gradual improvements to Russian society. Catherine's foreign policy was equally ambitious. She expanded Russian territory through successful military campaigns, particularly against the Ottoman Empire, and played a crucial role in the partitioning of Poland, which extended Russia's influence into Central Europe. Her military victories, including the annexation of Crimea, solidified Russia's status as a dominant power. At the same time, her diplomatic efforts ensured that Russia was recognized as a key player in European affairs. Unlike many rulers who focused solely on domestic affairs, Catherine understood that Russia's future depended on its ability to compete with other great powers, and she pursued policies that secured its place in the international arena. Despite her achievements, Catherine's reign was also marked by significant challenges. Peasant uprisings, most notably the Pugachev Rebellion, exposed the growing discontent among the lower classes. While she introduced some measures to modernize agriculture and administration, she largely sided with the nobility, whose support was crucial for maintaining stability. This meant that while the upper classes benefited from her policies, the vast majority of Russia's population, its serfs, remained oppressed. Her reluctance to address the fundamental injustices of the social system has led some historians to view her reforms as superficial, designed to strengthen her rule rather than genuinely improve the lives of ordinary Russians. Catherine's personal life has also been the subject of much speculation and intrigue. Unlike many monarchs who maintained a strict image of moral rectitude, Catherine was known for her numerous relationships and political alliances with her favorites. These relationships, while often romanticized or exaggerated, also had political implications, as she relied on trusted advisors and lovers to help govern the empire. Some of these men, such as Grigory Potemkin, played significant roles in shaping Russian policy and military strategy. While her personal life has often been sensationalized, it is undeniable that she was a ruler who understood the importance of loyalty and personal alliances in maintaining power. The significance of Catherine the Great's reign cannot be overstated. She transformed Russia into a major European power, laying the groundwork for future reforms and expansions. Her legacy is one of both progress and contradiction, a ruler who embraced Enlightenment ideals while maintaining autocratic rule, who sought to modernize Russia while preserving the power of the aristocracy, and who was both an intellectual and a pragmatic politician. Her reign is a testament to the complexities of leadership and the challenges of implementing reform in a vast and diverse empire. Even today, Catherine the Great remains a subject of fascination. She has been portrayed in countless books, films, and television series, often depicted as a powerful and ambitious woman who defied the conventions of her time. While some accounts exaggerate her personal life, her true legacy lies in her ability to govern effectively and leave a lasting impact on Russia's political and cultural landscape. Her policies influenced later Russian rulers, and her reign continues to be studied as an example of enlightened absolutism, an attempt to merge progressive governance with autocratic control. In examining the life and reign of Catherine the Great, one must consider both her successes and her failures. She was a ruler who understood power, diplomacy, and the need for reform, yet she also recognized the limits of what could be achieved in her time. Her story is one of ambition, intelligence, and resilience, making her one of history's most remarkable monarchs. Catherine the Great was born on May 2nd, 1729, in the small German principality of Anhalt-Zerbst as Sophie Friedrich August. Despite her modest beginnings, her life would take a dramatic turn when she was chosen to marry the heir to the Russian throne. Her transformation from a minor German princess into the most powerful woman in Russia was shaped by her ambition, intelligence, and adaptability. To understand how Catherine came to power, it is essential to examine her early life, education, and the circumstances that led her to Russia. Sophie was born into a noble but relatively unimportant family. Her father, Prince Christian August of Anhalt-Zerbst, was a Prussian general and a strict disciplinarian. Her mother, Princess Johanna Elizabeth of Holstein-Gottorp, was ambitious and had connections to European royalty, which played a crucial role in securing Sophie's future marriage. Despite their noble status, the family was not particularly wealthy or influential, and their prospects depended largely on advantageous alliances. Johanna, determined to improve her daughter's position, sought opportunities to elevate Sophie within European courts. From an early age, Sophie exhibited intelligence and a strong will. Her education was rigorous, focusing on languages, history, philosophy, and etiquette, all essential for a noblewoman of her time. She was fluent in French, which was the language of diplomacy and aristocratic culture, and she also studied Latin, an uncommon skill for women of her rank. Additionally, she was trained in music, literature, and religion, shaping her into a well-rounded and cultured individual. Her sharp mind and curiosity for learning would later define her reign as Empress of Russia. Sophie's destiny took a decisive turn when she was selected as a potential bride for Peter, the Duke of Holstein-Gottorp and heir to the Russian throne. This match was orchestrated by Empress Elizabeth of Russia, who sought a suitable wife for her nephew and wanted to strengthen ties between Russia and German principalities. Sophie's mother, eager to see her daughter rise in status, encouraged the match, despite the significant cultural and political challenges that came with it. In 1744, at the age of 15, Sophie and her mother traveled to Russia, where she was introduced to the Russian court. The transition was not easy, as the Russian nobility and Empress Elizabeth had high expectations for the future wife of the heir. Sophie, however, quickly adapted demonstrating an eagerness to embrace Russian customs and traditions. She converted to Eastern Orthodoxy, taking the name Catherine, Yekaterina, and abandoning her Lutheran faith. This religious transformation was not merely symbolic. It signified her complete commitment to her new country and helped her gain favor at court. Her marriage to Peter took place in 1745, but it was far from a happy union. Peter was immature, erratic, and uninterested in governing. He idolized Prussian culture and military traditions, which alienated the Russian nobility. Catherine, in contrast, was deeply committed to integrating herself into Russian society. She studied the Russian language, befriended influential courtiers, and began developing her political acumen. Over time, she realized that her husband's weaknesses could be an opportunity for her own rise to power. The years Catherine spent as Grand Duchess were challenging. She was often isolated, as Peter preferred the company of his military companions and neglected his wife. Despite her difficult marriage, Catherine remained focused on her personal and intellectual growth. She spent long hours reading works of philosophy, history, and political theory, developing an admiration for Enlightenment thinkers such as Voltaire and Montesquieu. These ideas would later shape her policies as empress. During this period, Catherine also cultivated alliances with key members of the Russian court. She recognized that Peter's unpopularity could lead to his downfall, and that she needed the support of powerful figures to secure her own position. Her charm, intelligence, and diplomatic skills won her many allies, including members of the Russian nobility and military officers who would later play a role in her rise to power. Catherine's early life in Russia was marked by personal struggles, but also by immense personal growth. She endured years of neglect and political uncertainty, but she used this time to prepare for the future. She was patient, calculating, and determined, qualities that would ultimately allow her to seize power when the opportunity arose. By the time Empress Elizabeth died in 1762 and Peter III ascended to the throne, Catherine had already positioned herself as a strong alternative to her husband. She had gained the loyalty of the military, the admiration of the nobility, and the favor of the Russian people. Her early life and experiences at court had prepared her for the defining moment of her life, the coup that would make her Empress of Russia. The year 1762 marked a turning point in Russian history as Catherine, then the Grand Duchess, orchestrated one of the most successful coups in European history. Her rise to power was not a product of mere chance, but the result of careful planning, political acumen, and the widespread unpopularity of her husband, Emperor Peter III. The events leading up to the coup, the key figures involved, and the strategic moves Catherine employed all highlight her intelligence and ability to navigate the treacherous world of imperial politics. Peter III ascended to the throne in January 1762, following the death of his aunt, Empress Elizabeth. His rule was brief but disastrous. Despite being raised in Russia, Peter remained deeply attached to his native Prussian culture, often prioritizing its interests over Russia's. His admiration for Frederick the Great of Prussia led him to make unpopular decisions, such as withdrawing Russia from the ongoing 7 Years' War, a move that many in the Russian military saw as a betrayal. This decision, along with his harsh treatment of the nobility and the Orthodox Church, alienated key factions that were essential for maintaining power. Catherine, on the other hand, had spent years cultivating strong relationships within the Russian aristocracy, military, and clergy. Unlike her husband, she embraced Russian traditions and presented herself as a true Russian ruler. She understood the deep dissatisfaction among the nobility and officers, and she used it to her advantage. Through careful networking and strategic alliances, she built a coalition of supporters who were ready to act against Peter when the time was right. The final catalyst for the coup came when Peter began taking steps that directly threatened Catherine's position. He publicly humiliated her, suggesting that he might divorce her and replace her with his mistress, Elizaveta Vorontsova. Additionally, his disregard for Russian military interests and his preference for Prussian customs further deepened the resentment against him. Sensing that her time was running out, Catherine moved swiftly to secure the throne. On July 9, 1762, Catherine made her move. With the support of the Imperial Guard, particularly the elite regiment stationed in St. Petersburg, she declared herself Empress of Russia. Dressed in military uniform, she rode through the streets of the capital, rallying troops and securing their loyalty. Her ability to inspire confidence among the soldiers was critical. Without their support, the coup would have failed. The nobility, already frustrated with Peter's rule, quickly aligned themselves with Catherine, seeing in her a leader who would restore stability and strength to Russia. Peter III, caught off guard and without significant military backing, was forced to abdicate without a fight. He attempted to flee, but was captured and placed under house arrest. Shortly after, he mysteriously died under unclear circumstances, with many believing he was assassinated to eliminate any potential threats to Catherine's rule. While Catherine denied any direct involvement in his death, the timing and secrecy surrounding the event left many to speculate about her role in ensuring that Peter could never reclaim the throne. Once in power, Catherine wasted no time in consolidating her authority. She was officially crowned as Empress of Russia on September 22, 1762. Unlike other rulers who came to power through coups, Catherine worked quickly to legitimize her reign. She framed her ascension as a necessary step to save Russia from an incompetent and unfit ruler, portraying herself as the rightful and capable leader the empire needed. This narrative helped her gain widespread support among the Russian people, further securing her position. One of her first acts as empress was to reward those who had supported her rise. She distributed lands, titles, and privileges to key members of the military and nobility, ensuring their continued loyalty. At the same time, she took careful steps to stabilize the government, avoiding drastic changes that could destabilize her fragile rule. She maintained many of the administrative structures established by her predecessors while gradually implementing reforms that reflected her vision for Russia. Catherine's ability to execute a nearly bloodless coup and transition smoothly into power demonstrated her extraordinary political skill. Unlike many rulers who faced significant resistance after seizing power, Catherine managed to unite different factions under her leadership. Her diplomatic approach, combined with her understanding of Russian political dynamics, allowed her to transform from an outsider into one of the most powerful monarchs in Russian history. The coup of 1762 was more than just a change in leadership. It marked the beginning of a new era for Russia. Catherine's reign would be characterized by territorial expansion, internal reforms, and a deep engagement with Enlightenment ideas. The successful overthrow of Peter III not only secured her place on the throne, but also set the stage for the ambitious projects she would undertake in the coming decades. As she moved forward, she faced the challenge of proving that her rule was not just the result of military support, but of her ability to govern effectively and reshape Russia's destiny. Catherine the Great's reign was marked by extensive reforms that sought to modernize Russia and strengthen its position as a major European power. Inspired by Enlightenment ideals, she attempted to reshape the country's legal system, improve governance, and promote economic development. However, while her policies brought significant progress in many areas, they also revealed the limitations of her rule. Despite her ambitions, Catherine had to navigate the realities of an autocratic system, balancing the interests of the nobility with the needs of the state. One of Catherine's most ambitious projects was the reform of Russia's legal system. Shortly after taking the throne, she sought to create a more just and effective set of laws. In 1767, she published the Nakaz, or Instruction, a document that outlined her vision for a modern legal code. Drawing heavily from Enlightenment thinkers such as Montesquieu and Beccaria, the Nakaz emphasized the principles of equality before the law, the rejection of torture, and the need for a rational legal system. It was a radical departure from Russia's existing laws, which were based on outdated and often arbitrary judicial practices. To implement these ideas, Catherine convened a legislative commission composed of representatives from various social groups, including the nobility, clergy, merchants, and peasantry. However, The commission faced significant challenges. Russia's deeply entrenched class divisions made it difficult to create a unified legal system that could satisfy all parties. The nobility, whose support was crucial to Catherine's rule, resisted changes that threatened their privileges. As a result, the Legislative Commission was eventually dissolved in 1768 without enacting any major legal reforms. Despite the failure of the commission, Catherine continued her efforts to modernize Russia's administration. She introduced a series of regional reforms aimed at improving governance and increasing efficiency. In 1775, she issued the Provincial Reform, which reorganized Russia's administrative divisions, increasing the number of provinces and granting local governors more authority. This restructuring helped streamline governance and allowed for better control over Russia's vast territories. By delegating responsibilities to regional officials, Catherine was able to strengthen the state's ability to collect taxes, enforce laws, and respond to local needs. Education was another area of focus for Catherine's domestic policies. She believed that an educated population was essential for a strong and prosperous state. In 1786, she introduced the Statute on Education, which established a system of state-run primary and secondary schools. These schools were designed to provide a standardized curriculum, with a particular emphasis on literacy, mathematics, and moral instruction. Although education remained largely inaccessible to the lower classes, Catherine's reforms laid the foundation for future advancements in Russian education. Catherine also sought to stimulate economic growth through various policies aimed at increasing agricultural and industrial production. She encouraged the settlement of Russia's vast, underdeveloped lands, offering incentives to both Russian and foreign settlers. Her administration promoted the development of new industries, improved infrastructure, and supported domestic trade. These efforts contributed to Russia's economic expansion, although the benefits were unevenly distributed. The serfs, who made up the majority of Russia's population, saw little improvement in their conditions, as the system of serfdom remained firmly in place. One of the greatest contradictions of Catherine's rule was her stance on serfdom. While she expressed interest in improving the lives of peasants and condemned serfdom in principle, she ultimately strengthened the institution. To maintain the loyalty of the nobility, she granted them increased control over their serfs, allowing them to impose harsher conditions. In 1785, she issued the Charter to the Nobility, which formalized the privileges of the noble class, including exemption from taxation and compulsory state service. This move further entrenched the divide between the aristocracy and the peasantry, leading to growing discontent among the lower classes. This discontent erupted in 1773 with the Pugachev Rebellion, the largest peasant uprising of Catherine's reign. Led by Emelian Pugachev, a former Cossack who claimed to be the rightful czar, the rebellion attracted thousands of peasants and serfs who sought relief from oppression. The uprising spread across Russia, posing a serious threat to Catherine's rule. However, the rebellion was ultimately crushed by the Russian military in 1775. In response, Catherine implemented stricter controls over the peasantry, reinforcing the authority of landowners and suppressing any further resistance. While Catherine's reforms brought significant changes to Russia's legal, administrative, and educational systems, they also highlighted the challenges of implementing Enlightenment ideals in an autocratic state. Her policies were shaped by the need to maintain stability and secure the support of the nobility, often at the expense of broader societal change. Although she aspired to create a more just and modern Russia, the limitations of her rule prevented her from fully realizing this vision. Despite these contradictions, Catherine's domestic reforms had a lasting impact on Russia. She laid the groundwork for future developments in governance, education, and economic policy. While she did not abolish serfdom or establish a fully equitable legal system, her efforts marked an important step in Russia's gradual modernization. Her reign demonstrated both the potential and the challenges of reform within an autocratic framework, setting the stage for later rulers to continue or resist her legacy of change. Catherine the Great's reign was not only defined by her domestic reforms, but also by her ambitious foreign policy. Her strategic vision and diplomatic skills allowed Russia to expand its borders significantly, solidifying its status as a dominant European power. Through wars, alliances, and territorial acquisitions, she extended Russian influence over vast regions, particularly in the south and west. However, her expansionist policies also created new challenges, including conflicts with neighboring empires and increased tensions within the empire itself. One of Catherine's primary foreign policy objectives was to expand Russia's presence along the Black Sea. The Ottoman Empire, which controlled much of this region, was a long-standing adversary of Russia. The two empires clashed multiple times throughout history, but under Catherine's leadership, Russia achieved significant victories. The Russo-Turkish Wars, 1768 to 1774 and 1787 to 1792, played a crucial role in this expansion. These conflicts, though costly, allowed Russia to gain strategic access to the Black Sea and secure key territories, including Crimea. The Treaty of Kukuk-Kaynarka, signed in 1774 after Russia's victory in the First Russo-Turkish War, marked a turning point in Russian-Ottoman relations. This treaty granted Russia significant territorial gains, including access to key Black Sea ports. It also gave Russia the right to protect Orthodox Christians within the Ottoman Empire, providing a pretext for future interventions in Ottoman affairs. Additionally, the treaty allowed Russian ships to navigate freely in the Black Sea, opening new trade opportunities that strengthened Russia's economy. Perhaps the most significant territorial acquisition of Catherine's reign was the annexation of Crimea in 1783. Crimea, previously controlled by the Ottoman-backed Crimean Khanate, had long been a contested region. By formally integrating Crimea into the Russian Empire, Catherine secured a crucial strategic position and solidified Russia's dominance in the Black Sea. This move not only expanded Russian influence, but also symbolized Catherine's commitment to making Russia a true European power. However, it also intensified tensions with the Ottoman Empire, leading to renewed hostilities in the Second Russo-Turkish War. Catherine's expansionist ambitions extended beyond the south. In the west, she played a key role in the partitioning of Poland, a move that reshaped the political landscape of Eastern Europe. Poland, weakened by internal divisions and lacking strong leadership, became an easy target for its powerful neighbors, Russia, Prussia, and Austria. In a series of 3 partitions, 1772, 1793, and 1795, these 3 powers systematically divided Polish territory among themselves, effectively erasing Poland from the map of Europe. Russia's role in the partitions of Poland reflected Catherine's strategic approach to diplomacy. Instead of engaging in direct military conquest, she worked closely with Prussia and Austria to divide Polish lands through negotiated settlements. The first partition in 1772 allowed Russia to acquire a significant portion of eastern Poland, including parts of present-day Belarus and Ukraine. The second and third partitions further expanded Russian control over Polish territories, bringing millions of new subjects under Catherine's rule. While the partitions of Poland were a diplomatic success for Catherine, they also had significant consequences. The absorption of Polish lands brought new ethnic and religious groups into the Russian Empire, creating challenges in governance and integration. Many Poles resisted Russian rule, leading to uprisings and tensions that persisted long after Catherine's reign. The partitions also drew criticism from other European powers, particularly those who saw the dismemberment of Poland as a violation of international norms. Beyond territorial expansion, Catherine sought to strengthen Russia's influence through alliances and diplomatic engagements. She maintained a complex relationship with European powers, balancing cooperation with competition. Her alliance with Prussia, particularly with Frederick the Great, helped Russia maintain stability in Eastern Europe. At the same time, she engaged in negotiations with Britain and France, carefully navigating the shifting alliances of 18th century geopolitics. Catherine's foreign policy also had an ideological dimension. She saw herself as a ruler who could bring civilization to the newly acquired territories, particularly in regions like Crimea and Poland. She encouraged Russian settlement, established administrative structures, and promoted economic development in these areas. However, her efforts to integrate these territories were met with resistance, as local populations often viewed Russian rule as oppressive. By the end of Catherine's reign, Russia had expanded its borders more than any other European power during the same period. Her conquests and diplomatic maneuvers transformed Russia into a dominant force in both Europe and Asia. However, her aggressive expansion also set the stage for future conflicts, particularly with the Ottoman Empire and the newly emerging nationalist movements in Poland and Ukraine. Catherine's foreign policy demonstrated her ability to combine military strength with diplomatic strategy. She understood that Russia's long-term power depended on securing access to key trade routes, strengthening its borders, and maintaining a balance of power in Europe. While her expansionist ambitions brought great success, they also introduced new challenges that would shape Russia's future geopolitical struggles. Catherine the Great is often remembered not only for her military conquests and political reforms, but also for her engagement with the Enlightenment. She saw herself as a philosopher queen, a ruler who could combine absolute power with the principles of reason, justice, and progress. Throughout her reign, she corresponded with some of the most influential thinkers of the time, sought to modernize Russian society through enlightened policies, and promoted cultural and intellectual development. However, her commitment to Enlightenment ideals was often limited by the realities of ruling a vast and diverse empire. Catherine's fascination with the Enlightenment was evident in her correspondence with leading intellectuals such as Voltaire, Denis Diderot, and Jean-Laurent d'Alembert. She admired their writings and saw herself as a ruler who could implement their ideas in practice. Voltaire, in particular, praised Catherine for her intelligence and ambition, calling her the Semiramis of the North. Their exchanges reflected Catherine's desire to be seen as an enlightened monarch, one who embraced reason and progress. Diderot, another prominent Enlightenment thinker, visited Catherine's court in 1773. She welcomed him warmly and engaged in extensive discussions on philosophy, politics, and governance. However, despite her intellectual admiration for his ideas, she was pragmatic in their application. When Diderot suggested radical reforms that would challenge the existing social order, Catherine reportedly dismissed them, telling him that while it was easy to theorize in a study, ruling a nation required a different approach. This interaction highlighted the contrast between Enlightenment ideals and the realities of autocratic rule. Catherine's support for education and the arts was one of the most tangible expressions of her engagement with Enlightenment thought. She established new schools, promoted scientific research, and encouraged the translation of Western European works into Russian. In 1764, she founded the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens, the first state-funded educational institution for women in Russia. This initiative reflected her belief in the importance of education, particularly for the elite, as a means of creating a more enlightened and capable ruling class. Another significant cultural achievement of Catherine's reign was the expansion of the arts. She was a passionate collector of European paintings, sculptures, and books, laying the foundation for what would become the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. Under her patronage, Russian artists, architects, and writers flourished, contributing to the development of a distinct Russian Enlightenment culture. She also commissioned numerous architectural projects, transforming St. Petersburg into a city that reflected both European sophistication and Russian grandeur. Despite her admiration for Enlightenment principles, Catherine was ultimately a pragmatic ruler who prioritized stability and control over radical change. She believed in the necessity of absolute monarchy and rejected democratic ideas that threatened her authority. While she advocated for legal reforms, she did not grant political freedoms that would weaken her power. Her reaction to the French Revolution demonstrated this contradiction. Initially, she sympathized with the revolutionary ideals of liberty and equality. But as the revolution became more radical and led to the execution of Louis XVI, she turned against it. She feared that such ideas could inspire unrest within Russia and took measures to suppress revolutionary sentiments. Catherine's commitment to Enlightenment principles was also tested by the realities of social and economic inequality in Russia. While she admired the writings of Montesquieu and Beccaria, which condemned arbitrary rule and injustice, she was unable or unwilling to extend these principles to the Russian serfs. Instead of granting them more rights, she reinforced the system of serfdom by granting additional privileges to the nobility. The Charter to the Nobility of 1785, which codified noble privileges, contradicted Enlightenment ideas of equality and justice. This decision was driven by political necessity, as Catherine relied on noble support to maintain her rule. The limitations of Catherine's Enlightenment-inspired reforms were further highlighted by the Pugachev Rebellion, 1773 to 1775. This massive uprising, led by the Cossack leader Emelian Pugachev, exposed the deep dissatisfaction among the peasantry. While Catherine presented herself as a ruler who sought to improve the lives of her subjects, the brutal suppression of the rebellion demonstrated her willingness to use force to maintain order. The rebellion reinforced her belief that strong, centralized rule was necessary to govern Russia effectively. Despite these contradictions, Catherine's reign represented a significant step toward the modernization of Russian society. She brought Western European ideas into Russia, expanded education and cultural institutions, and laid the groundwork for future reforms. Her policies may not have fully realized the ideals of the Enlightenment, but they helped shape Russia's intellectual and political landscape for generations to come. Catherine the Great was both a product and a critic of the Enlightenment. She admired its principles but recognized the challenges of applying them to an empire as vast and complex as Russia. Her reign illustrated the tension between idealism and pragmatism, between the desire for progress and the need for stability. While she did not transform Russia into a liberal state, she left behind a legacy of intellectual and cultural advancement that continued to influence Russian society long after her death. Catherine the Great's reign was marked not only by achievements in governance, expansion, and cultural development, but also by significant challenges to her rule. As an autocratic monarch, she faced opposition from various factions within Russian society, including the nobility, the clergy, and the peasantry. While she managed to maintain control through a combination of political maneuvering and military force, these tensions highlighted the underlying fragility of her rule. Despite her efforts to modernize Russia, the contradictions between her Enlightenment-inspired ideals and the realities of her governance often led to unrest and resistance. One of the most significant challenges Catherine faced was opposition from the Russian nobility. Although she relied on the nobility for support and granted them significant privileges, tensions still existed. Some nobles resented her centralization of power and her attempts to modernize the state at their expense. While Catherine's Charter to the Nobility, 1785, confirmed their rights and exempted them from compulsory state service, it also reinforced their dependence on the monarchy. Any attempts by noble factions to gain greater political autonomy were firmly suppressed, ensuring that power remained concentrated in the hands of the empress. Religious opposition also played a role in challenging Catherine's authority. The Russian Orthodox Church had traditionally been a powerful institution, closely tied to the state. However, Catherine sought to reduce its influence, confiscating church lands and transferring religious properties to state control. These measures weakened the financial and political power of the clergy, leading to resentment among religious leaders. While Catherine did not suppress Orthodox Christianity itself, her policies undermined the Church's authority, creating tensions between the throne and religious conservatives who viewed her reforms as a threat to traditional Russian values. Perhaps the most significant and widespread opposition to Catherine's rule came from the peasantry. The vast majority of Russia's population were serfs, bound to their landlords and subjected to harsh conditions. Despite her admiration for Enlightenment ideas, Catherine did little to improve the situation of the serfs. In fact, under her rule, The conditions of serfdom worsened as she granted landowners greater control over their serfs in exchange for their loyalty. This system of oppression fueled discontent and led to periodic outbreaks of rebellion. The most notable peasant uprising of Catherine's reign was the Pugachev Rebellion, 1773 to 1775, led by Emelian Pugachev, a Cossack who claimed to be the rightful heir to the Russian throne. The rebellion attracted thousands of discontented peasants, Cossacks, and serfs. Pugachev promised an end to serfdom, lower taxes, and greater rights for the common people. His forces managed to capture several key cities and posed a significant threat to Catherine's rule. However, the Russian military eventually crushed the rebellion, and Pugachev was captured and executed. The harsh suppression of the revolt demonstrated Catherine's unwillingness to tolerate challenges to her authority, reinforcing the absolute power of the monarchy. Catherine also faced resistance from ethnic minorities and regional groups within her expanding empire. As Russia absorbed new territories through conquest and diplomacy, it inherited diverse populations with different cultures, languages, and religious traditions. Managing these newly acquired regions required a careful balance of integration and control. In territories such as Ukraine, Poland, and the Caucasus, local resistance movements emerged in response to Russian rule. While Catherine sought to impose Russian administration and law in these regions, many local populations resisted assimilation, leading to tensions and, in some cases, violent uprisings. The annexation of Poland through the partitions of 1772, 1793, and 1795 created particular challenges. Polish nationalists resented Russian interference and sought to preserve their political and cultural identity. In 1794, the Kosciuszko Uprising, led by Tadeusz Kosciuszko, attempted to resist Russian and Prussian domination. Although the uprising was ultimately unsuccessful, it highlighted the growing nationalist sentiment in Polish society. Catherine's response was brutal. Russian forces suppressed the rebellion with great force, and thousands of Poles were exiled or executed. This event foreshadowed the difficulties Russia would face in governing its Polish territories in the years to come. Catherine's rule was also tested by intellectual and political dissent within Russia. While she promoted education and the spread of Enlightenment ideas, she was also wary of their potential to inspire revolution. The French Revolution of 1789 alarmed Catherine, as it demonstrated how Enlightenment rhetoric could lead to the overthrow of a monarchy. Initially sympathetic to some revolutionary ideals, she quickly changed her stance as the revolution became more radical. She banned French revolutionary writings, increased censorship, and cracked down on political opposition to prevent similar movements from taking root in Russia. Despite her efforts to maintain control, Catherine's later years were marked by growing unrest. Economic difficulties, including food shortages and inflation, contributed to dissatisfaction among the lower classes. Corruption within the government and the inefficiency of local administration further weakened public trust in the state. While Catherine remained a powerful and respected ruler, these underlying tensions created instability that would later challenge her successors. Catherine the Great's reign demonstrated both the strengths and weaknesses of autocracy. She was a skilled leader who managed to suppress opposition and maintain control, but her reliance on repression and the support of the nobility came at a cost. By reinforcing serfdom, centralizing power, and suppressing dissent, she ensured short-term stability but left deep divisions within Russian society. These tensions would continue to shape Russia's political landscape long after her death. Catherine's ability to navigate resistance and opposition was a testament to her political acumen. However, the contradictions of her reign between reform and repression, enlightenment and autocracy, highlight the challenges of ruling an empire as vast and complex as Russia. While she successfully maintained power, the issues she faced remained unresolved, setting the stage for future struggles in Russian history. As Catherine the Great entered the later years of her reign, she remained as ambitious and energetic as ever, but new challenges emerged that tested her leadership. Having ruled for more than 3 decades, she had transformed Russia into a dominant European power, expanded its borders, and introduced cultural and administrative reforms. However, by the 1790s, her empire faced growing internal and external difficulties. Questions about succession, increasing unrest, and the geopolitical consequences of her expansionist policies all played a role in shaping the final years of her rule. One of the most pressing concerns for Catherine in her later years was the question of succession. Her son and heir, Paul, had long been a source of tension between them. Catherine had little confidence in his abilities as a ruler and, according to some sources, even considered bypassing him in favor of her grandson, Alexander. However, despite her personal reservations, she did not take definitive action before her death. This uncertainty over succession created an undercurrent of political intrigue within the Russian court, as different factions prepared for a transition of power. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, significantly influenced Catherine's later reign. Initially, she had viewed the early revolutionary movement with some sympathy, as it echoed certain Enlightenment ideals she had admired. However, as the revolution became more radical and led to the execution of King Louis XVI in 1793, Catherine's stance changed dramatically. She saw the revolution as a dangerous threat to monarchy and social order. In response, she intensified censorship in Russia, restricted the spread of revolutionary ideas, and cracked down on any potential political dissent. The radicalism of the French Revolution reinforced her belief in the necessity of absolute rule. At the same time, Catherine's foreign policy continued to shape European geopolitics. She played a leading role in the final partitions of Poland in 1793 and 1795, which resulted in the complete disappearance of Poland as an independent state. These partitions strengthened Russia's influence in Eastern Europe, but also sowed the seeds of future conflicts. The absorption of Polish territories brought millions of new subjects under Russian rule, many of whom deeply resented Russian domination. This tension would later contribute to Polish nationalist uprisings in the 19th century. Despite her achievements, Catherine's later years were not without personal struggles. Her health began to decline, and she faced increasing isolation within her own court. While she had maintained a strong network of loyal advisors and confidants throughout her reign, many of her closest allies, such as her longtime lover and advisor Grigory Potemkin, had passed away. The court became a place of intrigue and political maneuvering, with various factions positioning themselves for influence after her death. Catherine continued to focus on governance and reform until the very end of her life. She remained deeply involved in state affairs, drafting new policies and overseeing the administration of her vast empire. Even as her health deteriorated, she refused to relinquish control, determined to solidify her legacy as one of Russia's greatest rulers. However, she was unable to enact any significant reforms in her final years, as her focus shifted more toward maintaining stability rather than initiating new changes. On November 6, 1796, Catherine suffered a severe stroke and passed away the following day. Her death marked the end of an era in Russian history. She had ruled for 34 years, making her the longest reigning female monarch in Russian history. Her son, Paul I, immediately succeeded her, though his reign would be short-lived and marked by instability. Many of Catherine's policies, particularly her emphasis on autocracy and territorial expansion, would continue to shape Russian governance long after her death. The legacy of Catherine the Great remains complex and multifaceted. On one hand, she was a visionary leader who modernized Russia, promoted education and the arts, and expanded the empire's borders. She positioned Russia as a dominant force in European politics and left behind a stronger, more centralized state. Her patronage of the Enlightenment helped introduce new ideas into Russian society, even if she did not always implement them fully in practice. On the other hand, her rule was also marked by contradictions. She championed Enlightenment ideals while reinforcing the oppressive system of serfdom. She spoke of justice and progress, but relied on censorship and repression to maintain control. She expanded Russian territory, but created long-term conflicts with neighboring nations. These contradictions have led historians to view her reign with both admiration and criticism, recognizing her achievements while also acknowledging the limitations of her reforms. Catherine the Great's legacy endures as one of the most influential rulers in Russian history. She proved that a capable and determined leader could shape the course of an empire, even in the face of opposition and challenges. While she did not completely transform Russia into a liberal state, she laid the foundation for future reforms and left a lasting impact on Russian governance, culture, and foreign policy. Her reign remains a defining period in the history of Russia, demonstrating both the possibilities and the limitations of enlightened absolutism. Catherine the Great's reign was not only defined by military conquests and political reforms, but also by her profound influence on Russian society and culture. She saw herself as a patron of the arts, education, and intellectual thought, believing that a flourishing cultural environment was essential for the progress of her empire. Her efforts to modernize Russian society were guided by Enlightenment ideals, though they were often tempered by the practical realities of governing a vast and diverse empire. By the end of her rule, Russia had experienced a significant transformation, emerging as a major European cultural power. One of Catherine's most notable contributions to Russian society was her emphasis on education. Recognizing that a well-educated population was essential for the advancement of the state, she sought to reform Russia's educational system. In 1786, she introduced the Statute on Education, which aimed to establish a network of state-run schools across the empire. These schools were intended to provide a standardized curriculum, teaching subjects such as mathematics, history, and philosophy. Although the system was far from perfect and primarily benefited the nobility, it laid the groundwork for future educational reforms in Russia. Catherine's policies also encouraged the education of women, a revolutionary idea at the time. The establishment of the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens in 1764 was a significant step toward providing formal education for aristocratic women. While it primarily served the daughters of the nobility, it represented a shift in attitudes toward female education and helped shape a new generation of educated women who would later play important roles in Russian society. Catherine herself was a prolific writer and correspondent, using her own example to promote literacy and intellectual engagement among her subjects. In addition to education, Catherine greatly expanded Russia's artistic and cultural landscape. She was an avid collector of European art, acquiring thousands of paintings, sculptures, and manuscripts from across the continent. Her personal collection formed the basis of the Hermitage Museum, one of the world's greatest art institutions. Under her patronage, Russian artists, architects, and musicians flourished, helping to develop a uniquely Russian cultural identity that blended European sophistication with traditional Slavic influences. Architecture also thrived during Catherine's reign, as she sought to transform St. Petersburg into a symbol of Russian grandeur. Inspired by European neoclassical styles, she commissioned the construction of numerous palaces, theaters, and public buildings. The Tsarskoye Selo complex, with its Grand Catherine Palace, became a symbol of imperial power and artistic excellence. The development of these architectural projects not only beautified Russia's cities, but also demonstrated the growing influence of Western artistic trends in Russian society. Literature and theater also experienced a golden age under Catherine's rule. She actively supported Russian writers and playwrights, recognizing the power of literature as a tool for shaping public opinion and reinforcing state ideology. Playwrights such as Denis Fonvizin and poets like Gavrila Dezhevin gained prominence during her reign, producing works that reflected both the changing cultural landscape and the political realities of Catherine's rule. Catherine herself wrote several plays and satirical pieces, using them to promote her vision of enlightened governance and to critique corruption and inefficiency within her administration. Despite these advancements, Catherine's cultural policies were not without contradictions. While she promoted intellectual freedom and education, she also implemented strict censorship to control the spread of revolutionary ideas. The French Revolution, which erupted in 1789, deeply alarmed her, leading her to impose greater restrictions on the press and suppress any works that threatened autocratic rule. Her desire to cultivate a literate and cultured society was always balanced against her need to maintain absolute power, illustrating the tension between Enlightenment ideals and political pragmatism. Catherine's reign also saw significant changes in social structure, particularly in the role of the nobility. Through policies such as the Charter to the Nobility, 1785, she solidified the privileges of the aristocracy, granting them greater autonomy in local governance. While this helped secure their loyalty, it also reinforced the rigid class hierarchy that defined Russian society. The serfs, who made up the majority of the population, saw little improvement in their conditions, and in many cases, their situation worsened as noble landowners were given increased control over their estates. This social divide created long-term tensions that would eventually contribute to future uprisings and revolutions. Religion was another area where Catherine's policies had a lasting impact. She sought to secularize church lands and reduce the political influence of the Russian Orthodox Church. While she did not challenge Orthodox Christianity itself, her efforts to limit clerical power and integrate religious institutions into the state reflected her broader goal of centralizing authority. At the same time, she promoted religious tolerance to some extent, allowing Muslim and Jewish communities within the empire a degree of autonomy, though discrimination against these groups persisted. Catherine the Great's influence on Russian society and culture was profound and far-reaching. She played a crucial role in bringing Russia closer to Western European intellectual and artistic traditions, fostering an era of cultural enlightenment that would continue to shape Russian identity for centuries. However, her reforms were often selective and aimed primarily at strengthening the state rather than fundamentally altering the social order. By balancing progressive cultural policies with rigid political control, she ensured the survival of autocracy while leaving a lasting legacy in Russian history. Catherine the Great's reign left an indelible mark on Russian history, not only through the political, military, and cultural transformation she initiated, but also through the long-lasting impact of her leadership style and policies. Her legacy is a subject of considerable debate, as it encapsulates both remarkable achievements and undeniable contradictions. As one of the longest-reigning monarchs in Russian history, Catherine's contributions to the Russian Empire extended well beyond her lifetime, influencing subsequent rulers, shaping Russia's position in European politics, and leaving a cultural imprint that lasted for generations. Catherine's legacy as a ruler is inextricably tied to her pursuit of enlightened absolutism. She was a monarch who admired the ideas of the Enlightenment and sought to apply them to Russian governance. Yet she remained firmly committed to autocracy. This tension between the ideals of progress and the reality of absolute power was perhaps the most defining aspect of her rule. Catherine's efforts to modernize Russia, reform the legal system, and promote education were significant, but they were tempered by her unwillingness to challenge the entrenched social hierarchies of serfdom and the nobility's privileges. In this sense, while she laid the groundwork for future reforms, she also reinforced the autocratic system that would later contribute to Russia's revolutionary upheavals in the 19th and 20th centuries. One of the most enduring elements of Catherine's legacy is her expansion of the Russian Empire. Under her rule, Russia grew significantly, gaining vast territories in the Black Sea region, the Caucasus, and Central Asia, as well as consolidating control over parts of Poland. Her ability to navigate the complex international politics of Europe, particularly in managing relations with the Ottoman Empire, Austria, and Prussia, established Russia as a dominant European power. Her expansionist policies, however, were not without consequences. The annexation of Poland, which effectively erased the nation from the map for more than a century, sowed the seeds for future conflicts, particularly with the Polish nationalist movements that arose in the 19th century. The acquisition of these territories also brought challenges in governance, as diverse populations with distinct cultural, religious, and political identities were incorporated into the Russian state. Catherine's approach to governance was shaped by her intellectual curiosity and her engagement with European thinkers. She corresponded with some of the leading figures of the Enlightenment, including Voltaire, Diderot, and Montesquieu, whose ideas on law, society, and governance influence her vision for a modern Russian state. While she implemented certain reforms based on these ideas, such as the nakaz, her legal code, and her attempts to improve education and the arts, her actions were always guided by the necessity of maintaining absolute control over her empire. For Catherine, the ideals of the Enlightenment provided a framework for ruling effectively, but they were not to be applied in a way that would challenge the traditional structures of power in Russia. The tension between Catherine's intellectual aspirations and her practical approach to governance was most evident in her relationship with the serfs. While she spoke often of progress and justice, she failed to address the deeply entrenched system of serfdom, which bound millions of Russians to the land in a condition of virtual slavery. Despite her early interest in the welfare of the peasants, her policies ultimately favored the nobility and further entrenched serfdom. The contradictions between her enlightened ideals and her treatment of the lower classes created a legacy of social unrest that would simmer for generations. The serf uprisings, including the devastating Pugachev Rebellion, were direct consequences of the oppressive social structure that Catherine did little to reform. Culturally, Catherine's reign is remembered for the flourishing of Russian arts and intellectual life. She was a patron of the arts, a lover of literature, and a supporter of intellectual discourse, which helped to transform Russian society into a vibrant cultural hub. Her establishment of the Hermitage Museum and her extensive collection of European art set the foundation for Russia's cultural prominence. Moreover, Catherine encouraged the development of Russian literature and theater, fostering a generation of writers and artists who contributed to a burgeoning national identity. However, her cultural policies were not entirely without limits. Her promotion of intellectual freedom was tempered by her fear of radicalism, and she imposed strict censorship on works deemed dangerous to the state, particularly after the French Revolution. This tension between fostering creativity and maintaining control over public discourse was a hallmark of her reign. Another key aspect of Catherine's legacy is her influence on the role of women in Russian society. While she was not the first female monarch of Russia, her reign marked a significant shift in the visibility and influence of women in politics and culture. As a woman in power, Catherine was a trailblazer, proving that a female ruler could not only wield authority, but also effectively manage an empire. She promoted the education of women, establishing institutions such as the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens and encouraging intellectual engagement among women of the aristocracy. However, while she championed female education, her own personal life, marked by numerous romantic entanglements, was often a source of public scrutiny. Nonetheless, Catherine's reign set the stage for later discussions on the role of women in Russian society, and her example would inspire future generations of women in leadership positions. Catherine's legacy in governance also extended to her impact on the Russian bureaucracy. She centralized administrative power, creating a more structured and efficient system of governance, which facilitated the expansion of the empire. Her establishment of a more systematic approach to local governance, particularly through the partition of the empire into gubernias, laid the foundation for Russia's modern administrative framework. However, her reliance on the nobility and her failure to institute significant reforms for the common people left the state apparatus vulnerable to corruption and inefficiency, challenges that would persist in Russia for many years. Perhaps the most enduring consequence of Catherine's reign was the political climate she left behind. While she succeeded in consolidating power and expanding Russia's territory, her authoritarian rule set the stage for future tensions between the monarchy and the Russian people. The growing divide between the aristocracy and the peasantry, exacerbated by her failure to address the issue of serfdom, contributed to the unrest that would characterize Russian society in the 19th century. The legacy of serfdom, combined with the failures of the autocracy to accommodate the demands for reform, would ultimately pave the way for revolutionary movements that would upend the Russian monarchy in 1917. Catherine the Great's death in 1796 marked the end of an era in Russian history, but her impact on the empire was far-reaching. Her successor, Paul I, was unable to maintain the stability Catherine had built, and her reforms were rolled back or ignored. However, Catherine's vision of a modern, powerful Russia continued to shape the country's political and cultural landscape. The ideals she espoused, despite their contradictions, set the stage for future rulers to grapple with the tensions between autocracy, reform, and social justice. In conclusion, Catherine the Great's legacy is one of both remarkable achievement and enduring contradiction. As an enlightened autocrat, she played a pivotal role in transforming Russia into a major European power, fostering a cultural renaissance, and laying the groundwork for reforms that would eventually be realized by her successors. Yet, her failure to address the most pressing social issues of her time, the plight of the serfs and the deepening social inequalities, ultimately overshadowed her reforms. Her reign, defined by both progressive ideals and political pragmatism, remains a defining chapter in Russian history, leaving behind a legacy that would continue to influence the empire long after her death.